Going backwards in time seems like a normal thing for video games, whether we're scurrying around in muddy fields in World War II, jumping across Victorian rooftops, or clanging our swords around in medieval periods. It's nothing really all that new for Ubisoft, as they've gone back in time more than a DeLorean with a full tank of fuel. The Far Cry series, however, has always sort of stuck around with a more modern setting, and it's one that we haven't really seen change a hell of a lot in terms of its time period. Well, that's until now. This time around we're turning back the clock a whole 10,000 years before baby JC himself, and our latest adventure takes place just after everyone freezing their balls off in the Ice Age. There's a whole host of new prehistoric mammals roaming around waiting to be slaughtered, and everything's got a lot more primitive. Now there's been a lot of speculation on Ubisoft's latest open world caveman simulator, whether it's going to be a complete fresh experience to live up to the high standards of the last titles, or whether it's simply just Far Cry 4.5. So is it a full fat mammoth sized new addition to the franchise, or is it just a gimmick to bridge the gap between the main titles? Well, it's time to find out. Here's my review on a game called Far Cry Primal. So our brand new adventure takes us way back before any kinds of modern technology was invented. It's the early Stone Age, and humankind isn't quite at the top of the food chain just yet. You assume the role of a typical caveman type guy called Takar, a hunter belonging to the Wenja tribe. He's on a journey to the land of Oros, but just after successfully taking out a mammoth to feed yourself and your hunter buddies, it turns out it's you that's on the menu, as a saber-toothed tiger comes in and ruins the party, wiping out everyone but yourself. After escaping the jaws of the hungry feline, you carry on to Oros to seek out the rest of the Wenja tribe, but unfortunately there's other tribes there that don't really like you. The first you'll encounter is the Udam tribe, who are basically the scruffy cannibalistic bullies of the game nicknamed the Flesh Eaters. And then there's the Azilla tribe, and these guys are basically a bunch of twisted fire starters. The rest of the game's plotline sort of intermingles the three tribes. It's mainly structured around Takar building a new village from the ground up, recruiting new members across the land that'll help the Wenja grow stronger, ultimately becoming more dominant, and taking over the land of Oros. We don't really get to find out about the new protagonist too much though, apart from the fact that he looks a bit like a buffed up hobo. Far Cry games have never really had strong main characters in the past, and it's no different here. This means that the game's sub-characters have had to do all the work and basically make up for what the hero lacks. This is kind of applied to Primal too. There's quite a few weird and wacky side characters you'll bump into as you play on. There's a dude who likes to conjure up some extreme neck nominations, causing you to trip balls in typical Far Cry fashion, because it'd be strange not to have trippy hallucinations in a Far Cry game. There's also a woman who chops off people's ears only to wear them as a necklace, as you do. But even though some of the side characters feel fairly memorable and interesting, there isn't a whole load of interactivity with them, other than going through cutscenes and being supplied with little tasks they want you to do. Because the game is set in the Stone Age, the English language, or any modern language for that matter, obviously hadn't been invented yet. And so no matter where you're from in the world, everyone's going to have to keep those subtitles on, just like you would with a foreign movie, as the characters in the game all speak their own dialect. Now if you eagerly bought this game expecting it to be Far Cry Jurassic Park, then you're going to be a tad disappointed. To prevent being hunted down by angry historians, Ubisoft are keeping it real, to a certain degree anyway, meaning you won't be clubbing velociraptors to death in this one. There's no dinosaurs, and the closest thing you're going to get to becoming reptile food is by getting chomped on by one of the game's prehistoric crocodiles. Because it wouldn't be a Far Cry game without throwing a few of those jump scares in there, eagerly waiting for us to dip our toes in the water, only for them to unexpectedly jump out of nowhere and make us shit our pants. Though you'll also find a bunch of new animals, even if some of them kind of feel like remodeled versions of the ones we've seen before. Environments and forests are teeming with life and feel really authentic, to the growl of a nearby jaguar waiting for the opportune moment to scratch your eyes out, to the huge expansive plains of dense plant life and shrubbery. Animals go about their daily business of eating grass and getting killed by each other, but this time around they aren't just there so we can turn them into a nice fancy bag to hold our gear. The land of Oros is a bit like a huge pet shop full of nasty creatures. Some of the more vicious, angry animals can actually be tamed and kept as your very own super dangerous pets, which you can use as sidekicks in combat against the other tribes. You can send your trusty beast to do your bidding, because sticks and stones probably will break their bones, but a saber-toothed tiger on the other hand will turn them into a fucking happy meal. And when you've got that kind of power at your fingertips, it'd be a sin not to use it. The new Beastmaster mechanic is definitely an awesome part of the game, but the only problem here is that out of the numerous vicious animals you can tame, most of us are going to want a saber-toothed buddy as early as possible. So there isn't really a lot of intense decision making when it comes to picking your companion, as the Sabertooth not only looks badass, but he's practically an off-road buggy later on in the game once you progress the skill tree. It's a bit of a shame that there isn't as much reason to pick the other beasts instead, as they sort of get left behind early on, and at the end of the day, why opt for second best? Now the lack of fully automatic, flame-throwing, RPG-flinging weapons might seem like a bit of a deterrent, seeming as the Far Cry games have always been about using a modern arsenal of deadly guns and high explosives. But believe it or not, Far Cry Primal doesn't suffer too much because of this. Arguably one of the best weapons that some people used religiously in the past games was the bow and arrow, as it required a bit more skill to use, and it was so damn satisfying launching an arrow through the air and into the side of some guy's dumb face. Well, it's back, and remains to be one of your primary weapons, along with a bunch of other stabby things from clubs, spears, and throwing shards, and these can be thrown, swung, and used to bash your enemies over the head. Want to watch a cloud of pissed off bees engulf a target and make them dance around like it's happy hour? Then you can chuck a special bomb at them, along with several others that transform them into Guy Fawkes, and there's even one that makes the best of chums turn gangster on each other. Spotting is back in Primal, and it's now easier than ever to scan that outpost and find those enemies. This time you've got an owl that can be controlled in the air like some kind of prehistoric UAV. The owl can highlight your targets from the sky and even trap them by dropping crafted bombs on their heads, and swooping in to take them out. It's a great way to scan areas without having to reach a vantage point first, and it's also a fun way to kill a few people without them even knowing what the hell happened. So although your arsenal isn't quite as advanced as normal, it is still very fatal, and if anything, a lot more barbaric and brutal. A theme that Primal doesn't shy away from is just how savage and violent the primitive nature of the Stone Age was. It's not every day you see dismembered bodies with chunks of flesh ripped out of them, lying around like victims of a Saw movie. Especially in a game like Far Cry, that admittedly has had its fair share of violence in the past, but the gore here is on a much higher level than what we've seen before. In-game enemies can't have their limbs chopped off Dead Space style, but that's not to say you won't find your fair share of mutilated corpses scattered around the environment. Not to mention that the more mature, primitive nature of the game definitely impacts the whole feel of it. Smacking a guy across the face, holding a stick with a massive tusk lodged on the end of it, or launching a spear right through some poor bastard's eye feels a lot more punishing than, say, an AK-47.
Brutality.
But other than high-tech weaponry, there's also something else missing from the game for obvious reasons: the inclusion of vehicles. This means you're going to have to slap on those walking boots as you'll be hiking all over the land like a wandering nomad. It's going to take longer to get everywhere, and you'll find yourself walking around for ages trying to get to your destination. Though you'll be pleased to know that eventually, you'll be able to ride some of the creatures around the map, getting you where you need to a lot faster. Because who needs an ATV when you've got a friggin' Smilodon? There's quite a lot of similarities with the past Far Cry games in Primal, as it's safe to say it definitely feels like part of the franchise. There's a big map to explore, with a load of side quests, collectibles, and of course the fan favourite, enemy outposts. Though instead of climbing up towers and getting vertigo, you'll now be setting bonfires alight instead, acting as spawn points and fast travel stations along with the liberated outposts. It all feels really familiar though, and the concept of travelling around the map, taking it over piece by piece, is still a huge part of the game. Other traditional features have also returned, such as the hunting and crafting system to upgrade your weapons and gadgets. Plus that skill tree is also back, letting us invest those otherwise useless XP points into something a bit more valuable. Unfortunately though, Far Cry Primal doesn't really do everything right. The weakest part of the game in comparison to the others in the series is definitely its story. Some of the missions are cool and all, but you never really feel like there's an end goal. The main story tasks and game's events don't really seem to develop much, and the game's two main antagonists are nowhere near as legendary as the crazy mofo Vass or the eccentric pagan Min. In fact, you rarely even see them, apart from the odd cutscene or two thrown in the mix every now and then. It would have been a lot nicer to have seen more character development here, getting the villains more involved and giving them a bit more of a presence in the game. So Far Cry Primal will have you saying things out loud like, "Did that guy really just piss on me?" Now I know why this fish is called a bite fish. And I've got no idea what the hell is happening right now. But is the game worth buying? To be honest, Far Cry Primal is a nice change from the typical modern day theme. It still feels like a Far Cry game in the way everything's laid out, and there's still a whole bunch of things here that we loved the games for in the past. Mechanically, Primal doesn't exactly reinvent the wheel, though there's a few tweaks and changes that give it a fresh tone, and it's a realm that we haven't really entered much before in video games. Though its story does lack a fair amount of depth, and its antagonists are a little bit disappointing when you look at Ubisoft's track record with its Far Cry baddies. That's not to say it isn't a well-rounded experience though. The game definitely feels like a spin-off title, and it's hard to see a sequel being made anytime soon. Most of the caveman ideas have probably been exhausted in Primal. But it's a fun change from the bigger, more well-known titles, and it still deserves some credit because of this. Primal hasn't evolved into anything completely new, but it still feels different enough to be classified as its own adventure. So it's time to upgrade that twig for a bigger twig. Hunt down big fluffy elephants, and stab your way to victory. The primitive land of Horus is waiting to be explored. Just watch out you don't become cat food in the process. So I hope you enjoyed the review, hit that thumbs up button if you did, and subscribe to see plenty more on my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.